have something economically. And this is always the bigger question. Sometimes you see highly statistical effects which go nowhere in terms of economics. Here what I show you, the beige columns, the thick columns, tell you the demographic impact according to the model. We take this alpha coefficient from the benchmark model and we compare and we multiply it with the change in the working age population. And the thin lines up there show you the total change in the Marshallian K. And what you see is that these year-on-year very small changes accumulate over time. So over the course of, for instance in Switzerland, over the course of 60 years, what happens in the Marshallian K is pretty much a demographic impact. So the trick is that year-on-year, aging might experience very little in the variation, but over very volatile process. But over 60 years, the same small impact going the same direction can have a big impact. And this is the story. This is something economically significant. And once again, we can peek into the future and look at what happens with working age population over the course of the next 20 years. This is the beige columns, and this is no science fiction again. This is the guys who will be older than 20 years from today. These guys have all been born. We don't do any magic to figure out the day we'll be there. There is no major war, there's no major natural catastrophe, these guys will be there. The 2050 is trickier. There is some projections going on there. But what you see is that the impact on the Marshallian K in a number of countries tend to be very strongly negative. These are the countries, especially Europe, Japan, Germany, the Southern European periphery, Korea is there. So you see, if this is right, this means there's falling money demand in many of these countries. What does it mean? And this is the conclusion. Let me get back to this on the conclusion of the three topics. What this falling money demand means. So what we have seen so far, that aging seems to have a profound impact on economic policy. Many of the key variables that we are spending on, many of the key budget elements that we are spending money on, is affected by aging and not in a good way. We saw fiscal impacts, pension and healthcare costs. We saw debt projections which go to the 500% of GDP levels. So in short, we saw a number of unsustainable processes that we need to stop, that are kind of painful to stop, and these are the processes when you really want to think ahead. You don't want to have people who retired, who are withdrawn from the labor market for 5 years, that now you should go to find a job. That just won't work. If there is no money, you have to train people to be able to work longer. You have to change the structure of the labor market. Also, we saw that aging has profound implications for asset markets. Aging affects the equilibrium between buyers and sellers of major financial and real assets. It means that in the future there will be a lot more older people that will put a downward pressure on asset prices. This means that when you are thinking about solutions in the government sphere, in the fiscal sphere, you don't want to assume that privately funded pensions can work as it in the future, in the next 40 years, the same way how they work in the past 40 years. Past asset returns are not a very good guidance of future asset returns, because the fundamentals of the world are changing precisely because of aging. And last, we saw that aging also has a monetary impact. People not only hold real assets, in the real economy we have money. People demand money at a certain age. I haven't had time to show the regression, but actually people demand money between the age of 45 and 64. So this is the time, this is when money demand picks up. This is when lots of asset demand picks up. This is the time when people save. And this declining money demand will have consequences for quite a number of issues. Think about deleveraging. Everybody talks about deleveraging in Europe right now, no? What is deleveraging? You have a deleveraging of assets, of loan-to-deposit ratios of banks, for instance. No? But many banks have too much loans compared to the deposits they collect. One way of deleveraging is not to provide new loans, but that's not exactly good for the economy. The second is to collect more deposits. Now this results, Sanchez, in the long run it's difficult to collect new deposits because this new deposit is money. This is in the money holdings. And you have structural headwinds too, in many European countries, for instance, for this money demand. So this is not only something that in a very abstract way affects very far future. This can affect the structure of the financial system because people just might not have the savings that the system wants to place. And also, this means that if money demand falls, then everything has been equal, there are inflationary pressures. People actually want to spend the money. In the past, they might want to save it, and it was easy to control inflation because the basic process was inflationary. In the future, this changes to inflationary. And that means that central banks face a much more difficult, or a somewhat more difficult job. I don't know how more difficult it is. So, in the short run, what I wanted to get with this talk here, through these papers, is that aging is perhaps the most relevant long-run policy issue. And long-run economic policy issues are even more difficult to tackle than short and medium-run issues like global imbalances. People have a very strong incentive to solve global imbalances because global imbalances can come to an abrupt halt well within an election cycle, well within a political cycle. A current account deficit is something that economic policymakers, politicians can imagine happening in a 4-year horizon. So it's much more easy to focus attention to it. Aging is a lot more difficult. Because every year there's a tiny impact which makes policy more difficult, which makes the budget situation a bit more constrained. But this is really boiling the frog slowly. Do you want to take big action? Do you want to take a major reform today to have something 20 years, 30 or 40 years down the road? And that's a lot more difficult economic policy question. So I think that this deserves a place here. We have 3 more minutes for questions. No questions, then thank you very much.
Sept Takats.